All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of season 2 of This, That, and the Other. My name is Varun Chandramohan, your host for today. And just to give you a little bit of a background about the show itself, This, That, and the Other is a series that tackles some of the biggest and most debated topics that both managers and employees encounter in their professional and personal lives. So far in the series, we've covered topics such as the pursuit of happiness and if it was a fool's dream or a possibility. We've tackled longevity and whether it was down to genetics or choice. And last week, we spoke about bias in the workplace and when personal life choices collide with your professional life. And our topic for today is one of the wackiest we've done so far in our series. And it's about office politics and the fine art of sucking up. And just a reminder to all our viewers, all our past episodes are available on our YouTube page, Luminary Learning Solutions. Do swing by our page and don't forget to like our videos and hit the subscribe button. All right, it's time to introduce my guest. First up, he's an international speaker, thought leader in behavior, and an organizational performance coach. He currently serves as the CEO of Coeus Creative Group. Jay Johnson is here with us today. Hello, Jay. Nice to have you on the show.
Hi, Varun. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, the pleasure is ours. And my second guest is a mentor for entrepreneurs at the Asian Institute of Management and is the former CEO and president of Credit Information Corporation in Manila, Philippines. Jamie Gotch is here with us today. Hello, Jamie. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, AJ. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, the pleasure is ours, Jamie. All right, thank you everyone for being here. And in the best interest of our audience, I would like to start off this conversation by asking my panel about politics itself. I'd like to start with you, Jay, if you don't mind. What is politics for you and why should we be aware about it?
Well, I think that's a really challenging question, asking somebody from the USA what politics is, especially right now. So when we think about what politics is, oftentimes we know that in a political situation, there's often a winner and a loser. And when you have that situation inside of an office place, it naturally creates sort of an us and them dichotomy. So politics can be anything from leading to conflict. It can create all kinds of challenges. In most cases, it does not have a positive connotation unless you're really going for like employee of the month. Then those types of politics might be decent. But I think really what it is and what we're talking about is those challenging behaviors, because for us, what we do is everything focuses on behavior. So it's the behaviors that pit people against each other, that has people doing different things in order to elevate their status or maybe demote somebody else's status. And that's really what politics is to me.
Right. Yeah, that's quite concise. Thanks. Thank you, Jay. Jamie, any thoughts on what politics is?
Sure. I mean, I can't say that the politics here is much better than the current politics in the U.S.
Sure.
We have the same type of issues in terms of politics, and I think the same thing goes down all the way to the organization. But I think at least within an organization, if you remove it from let's say a governmental context, politics really it depends which side you're standing on, because politics is either the bad side of the story when it's used for bad, or it could also be called relationship building if that's what you're trying to achieve, if you're trying to make it more cohesive and you're looking for some type of leverage from one side of the organization to the other, just to create some kind of either equality or equity in the understanding of what the organization needs to do. So it does have a bad connotation for sure, because when you say politics, it seems like you're acting beyond the sphere of what you should normally be able to achieve within the level that you're in an organization. But again, it really depends on which perspective you take. If you're more liberal with your views, you can say that politics is just about trying to manage possibilities, and whether you win or lose, you can walk away a good loser. But again, politics does have a very negative connotation when it's applied to moving up or pushing other people down. So similar to what Jay said, I completely agree.
Right. I agree too, and there's obviously not there's a lot of gray area in when you try to define something such as politics. Speaking of which, we do have Mike, who just joined us. Hello, Mike.
Hi there. I heard people say agree, so I'll be happy to disagree. But first, what's the question?
Well, Mike, before we throw the question to you, I would like to introduce you to our audience. So ladies and gentlemen, Mike is a global speaker. He's a consultant, coach. He's a facilitator. He's also the go-to guy to make sure your strategies get your team support. So he's the founder of Storyminers. So Mike, once again, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and to meet some new people.
Hey, Mike.
Oh, the pleasure is ours. So Mike, I was just asking Jamie and Jay what their thoughts were on the term politics. Like why should we know about it? Why is it important? And of course, from an office context and otherwise. Any thoughts on what politics is for you?
Yeah, in my experience, politics has been what happens when the strategy of an organization, its design, and its way of handling commitments isn't clear. It's a little bit like advertising, which is a tax on poor brands. If you have a great brand, you usually don't need to advertise. If you have a great organization, you shouldn't have too many politics because people are there for the right reasons to do the right things. So clarity and politics kind of go against each other. That's my take.
Oh, that's the first time I've heard that. Thank you for sharing. Can I ask, are there different types of politics? What's accepted? And I believe employee of the month was brought up, and Jay, you brought that up. So there's a lot of talk about companies usually try and at least in this part of the world, they try and shy away from employee of the month, and knowing, every time that comes up, they say, how are we going to evaluate? How are we going to ensure that we are biased, or rather we are not biased? Should a reward mechanism such as employee of the month, should it exist? Does that fall under politics? Your thoughts. So this is open to the panel, and we can have a discussion from here on. So anybody who would like to take a stab at that, good politics, bad politics, what do you think?
I'll piggyback on something Mike said, which I thought was a brilliant answer. No, I don't think employee of the month is a good idea. I don't think that providing those types of extrinsic rewards are necessarily really motivating. And I think they can lead to politics. And especially if you are passed over for employee of the month over and over again, guess what? You start to immediately look at the people who are winning it and going, well, they just, they have mastered the fine art of sucking up or anything else that gets them to that position. So when I think about something like how do you motivate, or how do you necessarily do that without something like employee of the month, it's really about helping people to find their purpose and their passion within that organization. Much like Mike said, if you can help them find that purpose and passion within your organization and its culture, that's where you're going to get your real motivation from.
Right. And any thoughts, Mike, Jamie?
Sure. Well, in the government framework that we've done, and in many of private sectors that I've been involved in as well, what they try to do is to achieve some type of framework for recognition, performance evaluation, and later on advancement. And many of these things, they don't happen on a month-to-month basis. So employee of the month feels like a flavor of the month kind of thing. Normally, performance is based on either short, medium, long-term projects, and they're seen over time. So when the periods of time get too short, certainly those recognition, those how tokens of recognition become more or less part of, again, politics, how close you are to the people who give these awards or make these decisions. But I think if you can properly parse all the activities, whether it's activity-based, project-based, whether short-term, medium-term, long-term, I think some type of recognition is possible. And I think it does form a basis for some kind of advancement within the organization. Of course, the overarching framework here is that there should be something that's palpable and visible to the organization and is aligned to the direction of the organization itself. Otherwise, then it's just favoritism put in a nicer package.
Yeah. I'll throw in a couple of thoughts real quickly, and this is an idea. What if instead of employee of the month, which carries all the negative connotations that we've heard, we had example of the month? Every organization goes through change continuously, and pointing out situations where people have thrived by trying a new behavior, pushing against the norms, or achieving something in an unexpected but wonderful way would be really helpful to share. So an example of the month would be calling somebody out, but not in a bad sense, in a good sense, showing how their behavior led to a positive outcome and then deconstructing it so that other people can see what are the more esteemed qualities and approaches in an organization. So it could be a teaching moment.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Can I ask the question, is politics at the workplace inevitable? Everybody talks about, I mean, every induction, every organization out there saying, no politics and all of that. But is it inevitable though? And I would like to know your thoughts on that.
Well, I'll give it a shot this time. I'll save Jay the first mover. I think there are two sides to politics. One is the intent of the person initiating whatever activity he wants, pulling whatever lever for whatever purpose he wants to do it. And if it's self-motivated and it's in the context of something that cannot be recognized by his peers, whether through experience with him, through an operational activity, or doesn't come with a positive impact to the organization but is self-centered, then certainly it is inevitable. But the inevitability isn't always bad. Like, for example, sometimes you're just stuck at a certain level and a project can't move forward and you need to pull certain levers just to get things done. And I think that's one area where you might say that you would have to overreach a little bit beyond your normal sphere just to move the organization forward. But again, it's really a weird mix of
Jamie, I think we lost you there for a second.
Do people levers kind of politics? If using that lever just moves the project up a little bit, then I can see why someone might attempt it and might hope that there's a positive effect to it.
Right, gotcha. Thanks, Jamie. Jay, Mike, any thoughts?
I'll go next. I have two thoughts on this one. I was just jotting those down. So Jamie, thanks for spurring me on here. I think politics comes into play in a negative sense when people try to get more of what they want versus more of what the organization needs or more of what they're supposed to do. So it's kind of like commandeering the resources and the people of the organization for personal purposes. And we have some examples of that going on at large scale in the country that I live in right now.
Right.
The other thing, the good side of politics, though, is that you can use politics, which is personal charm and influence and a cajoling, which is a phrase that means to kind of nudge people along. You can get people to opt in to something rather than go around them. So for positive, if you have a good intent, I think using your personal skills to convince and coordinate are okay. If you're trying to go against what the organization is all about or what your contract for the client is for, or advance yourself at the expense of others, that is a cancer. Yes, it exists in most large organizations, but it is a death sentence for the culture of a smaller firm. That's my 2 cents.
Oh, sure. Jay, any?
Yeah, I'm absolutely loving this, and I think both Jamie and Mike bring up amazing points on that question. I agree with both. What I look at and say the inevitability factor comes from, so my background is behavioral intelligence, behavioral economics, behavioral science, and from that perspective, we as human beings have that sort of self-centeredness in a part of our brain. We can overcome that. It's much to Mike's point, we can overcome that, but I think that where we find the healthiest of organizations, what they've done is created psychological safety. And what they have done with that psychological safety is given the opportunity to call out the behaviors when it turns into sort of a negative politics, or to manage the conflicts as those conflicts are occurring, not letting them seethe beneath the surface and fester and turn into something that politics and then, sort of more politics and politics back and forth until all of a sudden it's out of control and the culture is destroyed. When you have strong psychological safety, it gives you the opportunity to address those intentions, as Jamie had said. You get to address those different challenges, as Mike has said. So I definitely agree with that. And I think that a strong organization is going to have strong psychological safety to address it.
Right. And maybe if I can just jump in again, Barun, and conversation.
Sure.
I think one of the things when we do hiring, what we look for is someone who wants to move upwards in the organization. There has to be that natural desire.
Right.
And it should always, first of all, that's something we look for. We want someone to constantly grow within the organization. But then the other side of it as well is that there should be enough mechanisms within the organization to enable a natural movement upwards, whether that's performance-based or relationship-based in terms of how things get done in the organization. And I think the challenge is when there aren't enough ways to move upwards, at least in a reasonable pace or that's recognizable within certain empirical standards, that's when the levers of politics become more enticing to pull, to build relationships over performance, build self-interest over interest of the company. So factoring in the idea that we want people to move upwards, we want people to be ambitious, we want people to be able to do more with more resources and express themselves positively within an organization. But if that's not possible within the organization, either they start moving outside the framework or leave the company.
Yeah. In addition to a personal advancement, I think there's also the lever that you can use in a good way around individual development. And I want to toot Storyminers.
Just train them already to begin with.
Say again? Okay, keep going. I'd like to toot Storyminers' horn for a second. When we take on consulting projects, we always have a conversation with clients about what is the learning strategy for this assignment. So in addition to getting the work done and getting a fee and filling out the project management tick boxes, we're also trying to make sure that each participant on the project learns something, myself included. So we declare what those learning journeys are up front, and we work with our clients to make sure that they're coordinating that opportunity the project brings to give their people a learning experience that helps them grow, which can be used to kind of grow them in the firm, but can also just help grow them as an individual. And I've noticed that there's a lot less stress and tension and, unspoken expectation around advancement, which carries a lot of bias in it, because some people are very happy where they are and they don't have to advance, but if they get a chance to grow, all the better. So you can grow tremendously and not have to climb up the food chain to a point where you're no longer confident.
Oh, that's a very valid point. Let me ask you an interesting question. Do you think the environment influences how we engage in politics, or how far we get sucked into it? And when I mean environment, I'm talking, yes, I mean we're talking of your childhood, your family, and so on, and even the media, social media. Are they shaping the way we act within organizations?
Good question. I think that's inevitable. By the way, we keep avoiding the great title that we had, The Fine Art of Sucking Up. We're wrapping it around politics when sucking up is really the core of this thing. I mean, what is sucking up? But to your point, how we suck up to our bosses. Let's say first of all, maybe we should contextualize. You can suck.
Jamie, I think we lost you.
in any direction, unless you do within your framework, for better or for worse. And I think how this is done is very well influenced by either how we grow up, or more especially, I think, for the younger generation now. I'm 52, so everyone in my office is younger than me. And you can really see the difference between people who are closer to my age and how they approach me to try to suck up to me versus how the younger people do it. The younger people seem to have a more casual way of doing it. They say, "Oh, can I make you a friend on Facebook, or can I link to your whatever social media platform you have?" And that's their way of creating a bond with me. For the older guys, it's the normal, drink after work, or send me a card or a note, something that's contextual to their age group and what they feel is appropriate. So absolutely, this whole sucking up thing, for better or for worse, is definitely influenced by at what point in time did they learn, or what is their context for this kind of relationship building, if you want to call it that.
Hey, I'd like to ask a question of the audience, since it's such an international audience here. In your opinion, and from your view of the world, from the places that you live and work, are the people who suck up more less competent? Is it a compensation strategy, or is it something totally different?
Oh, that's interesting.
That is a really interesting question. I like that question, Mike. When you ask about the environment, Varun, if I may, I think one of the things, so one of the things that we developed to help people on their behavioral journey is called the Behavioral Elements Assessment. And I think Anton has a little bit of knowledge of it. I sent over something at some point in time, but you can actually take this free, quick behavioral elements assessment through our website. I don't know if you guys can share that link, but it's absolutely free. It divides us into sort of these 4 different elements of behavioral preferences. This doesn't mean who you are. This means what behaviors do you lean into, and that goes into culture, that goes into generations, that goes into sort of your background. There's a lot of cultures that are very individualistic, like where Mike and I currently reside. It is a very individualistic culture versus other cultures which are more collectivistic. And I think that when you see some of those nurture or even nature influences, it does have an effect on the way that people either engage in politics, whether they have a hyper competitive drive, whether they have a hyper collaboration drive. Those things are going to absolutely determine how people play the game, whether they play the game from a collectivist nature or an individualistic nature.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And I am going to ask you, gentlemen, about the fine art of sucking up, and I'm trying to pace myself so that we get to get to the great part, and towards the second half. I want to close this whole office politics discussion with a short discussion about gossip. Now, I guess one could argue that gossip and politics may feed into each other. Maybe. I would like to know your thoughts on that. But to start off this conversation, I read something interesting, and I'm not sure if you gentlemen came across this article. I believe Stanford did some research on it, and I think even Berkeley did, and they came up with a term called pro-social gossip. And I'm not very familiar with this field, so I'm not sure if they were the ones who coined the term. But anyway, there was a paper on pro-social gossip, and they were talking about how gossip was the very thing that kind of held the fabric of our civilization together. And in an office environment, what they were saying was that gossip is what warns you about, okay, so stay away from this person, or this person is a predator, or this person behaves this way. So therefore, so that was their argument, and how gossip shaped civilization, and how it held the fabric of civilization together. Any thoughts on gossip and on pro-social gossip, if you have heard about it, but gossip in general and its role in office politics?
I'll lead you off.
Jay.
So
Yeah.
I've not actually heard it referred to as pro-social gossip, but there's a fantastic book called Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harris. Just
Okay.
absolutely, it's a brief history of humankind. And one of the arguments that's made is gossip was actually the sort of the foundation of community and getting to understand each other. And as larger communities started to go, it was tough to know everybody, but the gossip is what kind of guided people's direction. Now,
Right.
whenever we hear the word gossip, there's a negative connotation with it. So it's interesting to hear pro-social gossip. I think it does serve a purpose. It's also a very natural human behavior. And part of it is gossip really comes from a multitude of different sort of facets. It can come from ego, that I have information and now I share it, because knowledge is power, but only if you know that I have the knowledge. So, I mean, at that point in time, that kind of is it's an interesting, it's a capital almost. I have knowledge, I share my gossip, you share your gossip. We do this economic trade of different pieces of knowledge, and sometimes people are left out of that economic trade, and then they feel like they're the fringe or the outside of a clique. So to your point, I think gossip does serve a purpose when it is pro-social, but I think it is also just a very, very natural element of human behavior dating back to before we had, social media, before we had office politics, we had, cave politics or whatever those looked like.
Right. Mike, Jamie, any thoughts on gossip, pro-social gossip?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on that. Hang on. One of my mentors told me a long time ago that simple minds talk about things, idle minds talk about others, and great minds talk about ideas. So with that as the context, gossip is nothing more than a communications channel, like Jay just described. It's the way we share information. In some cases, it's an early warning system. Your first day at work and somebody meets you at the water cooler, which nobody has anymore, and they say, "Oh, I just got invited to work on the XYZ project," and they go, "With Fred?"
Yeah.
That kind of early warning can be good or bad. It can be highly politicized, or it can be very helpful. Gossip is also the fastest form of communication in a company. It goes so quickly, especially if there's something hot to talk about. So it can be used to share new cultural expectations. The best thing of all is for it to share ideas. And in those conversations where gossip happens, to reinforce any new norms or cultural standards that the company is trying to promulgate. The other thing is that gossip can be terribly, terribly destructive, especially when you're talking about other people and somebody is trying to create gain for themselves by destroying someone else. That's a net sum gain of 0 or less. That's not very good at all. And the last thing where gossip is really amazing and super helpful is if you think about it like a share on social. When you're in these quick little conversations, trust levels are extremely high, and openness to hear new ideas is also at an all-time high. So imagine you're in a gossipy kind of a conversation and somebody says, "Oh yeah, I just got on the Fred project. Oh, that guy Fred, he is absolutely amazing. I was on a project with him, da 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 da." So these kinds of affirmations can also help build the organization. So it's not always negative. So gossip is the choice of the sharer.
Yeah. Well, everything's been said, but maybe just one quick thing. In the Philippines, many of the organizations actually have penalties for gossiping. So they try to institutionalize besmirching someone's reputation within the workplace. They don't really care what happens outside, but do it inside, then you have a problem. But I can guarantee you that in all organizations, gossip is the one thing nobody ignores, because then that sort of gives you some, if there's the dark web that you need once in a while to know what really is going on under the surface, gossip is the office version of that. And the HR people are never remiss, at least in my experience, in compiling these little things. But the smart ones know how to filter out what's relevant and what's not. So gossip, does have a purpose in an office. It is an early warning system, but it's also a form of when it does get to management in a well-filtered manner from the sources that they have within the organization, it can be very, very helpful.
Got it. Brilliant thoughts on that topic. Well, with that said, let's move on to the fine art of sucking up. So, gentlemen, your thoughts. What is okay? So let's first dissect the whole definition of sucking up. What is it? Why do we do it? And is there an art to do it? So we'll start there, and then we'll go into the nitty-gritties. And who'd like to take a first stab at it? And I think Jamie, you deserve to.
Okay.
You deserve to go first on this one.
All right. So I think I'm always reminded by that scene in Top Gun when they ask. When I think it was Ice that asked Goose, "How did you get into the Top Gun program? How many asses did you have to kiss?" And then right. Goose said, "I can't remember, but I can assure you that the line was long and distinguished." So the art of sucking up really is about choosing who to suck up to and when. I think there's a certain sphere of influence where people will be able to accept that he's sucking up to him or her because there's a certain relationship he wants to build, whether it's for an upward movement or expanding whatever level he's in at the moment. I think but the problem happens is when you reach too far, and I don't want to say that this is the organization is so hierarchical that there's no way of meeting people beyond your certain pay grade or salary level. But I think, just to exaggerate, when someone from the rank and file manages to come in constant contact with, let's just exaggerate, the CEO of the company, then that breeds a certain suspicion within his peers.
Right.
There might be some work, but if he's looking to discuss something with someone just a little bit higher than them to see what he can do to move up or to help from his perspective, or move sideways to laterally to people who he might be working with in the future, then I think this kind of relationship building can be very supportive and very valuable. So it really depends how far high. Is it too high? It's kind of a little weird, but that's the way I see it.
Sure. Mike, Jay, and thoughts?
Well, I've noticed that in my career, the managers that I've enjoyed working with and for the most are the ones that put very few limits on me. They'll encourage me to have conversations 1, 2, or 3 clicks up, and I see that as a responsibility, but also a recognition that there'd be some advantage to having those conversations. So, sucking up to me is it starts off as and so it's a weird term. Let me start over. It's a very weird term because it has a negative connotation, right, and it instantly calls to mind people who win favor without deserving it. All right, so that's the blinders, and it's a great title. I'm sucking up right now. Varun, that was an amazing title. Great way to do that, to set up the conversation. But in my mind, there's a fine line that we all need to be aware of. At the beginning of the sucking up protocol, you're showing an enthusiasm for somebody else's ideas. You may or may not understand the ideas at the start, but you want to get a little bit closer. You might want something for yourself, but hopefully there's a benefit to the organization from you having an unexpected relationship or favor from somebody. They get to use you as a sounding board or something like that. But the part where it turns dangerous and dark and starts to destroy value is when you hide information from the people that you're sucking up to. If you become a yes person, that is another kind of cancer. And I think we should all call out explicitly that that's not a good way to move an organization forward. In no situation is that good for the key constituents. It's only good for one person, not for everybody else. Does everybody agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, and I like what you said there, because sucking up does carry that negative connotation, but in reality, what we're talking about is building influence. When we're trying to suck up, essentially what we are doing is identifying, and or whether it is in a positive or negative context, what we're essentially doing is to try to build some level of influence. Where we get into trouble is when we see something like somebody who is sucking up in a way that, again, is patronizing the person at the top or being a yes person to the person at the top. And oftentimes you'll see that where there is a lack of psychological safety is that people feel the need that they have to do that in order to survive, to get their ideas heard or anything else. But I think that one of the interesting things that we could look at with sucking up too is from a leadership perspective, where does that go in the opposite direction, right? The whole context of sucking up is that I am a person who is under a leader and I suck up to said leader. But what about the leaders that are actually more, I guess, behaviorally intelligent, that suck up downwards towards their employees, that literally do their best to build that influence model with them? I don't know if that would be called sucking down or if that's an appropriate nomenclature there, but you see what I'm saying is that this could be a reciprocal thing where it's not necessarily just sucking up or down, but it's the actual relationship building, as Jamie and Mike have both allotted to at one point in time in our discussion.
Right. But does it work though? I mean, does this sucking up work, or does it end up doing more damage?
Well, it depends on the aim that you're asking for, because it works in some situations for some goals for some people. But in my belief, I guess that is a belief, I think sucking up causes more unmeasurable damage than it does measurable good. The damage is much more widespread. It sets a terrible model for others in the organization, and it starts to move the DNA away from purpose and what's right and creating value towards self-interest and value destruction. So it depends. You know, it's a really cool name though. It really opens up the conversation. That's me sucking up again.
Right.
and I think my
for a moment I thought, yes. Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm really I'm teasing about the sucking up. It's a great topic, and we're getting a lot of good conversation out of it. So good job on that. And I mean that, honestly.
Yeah, so and I think that's a good point as well, Mike. I mean, just the banter itself. I think when sucking up constitutes giving a little bit more recognition than what it actually deserves, just to make that person feel better or just to increase the bond between you and that person you're sucking up to, I think that's a great thing. I think that's a very safe kind of thing. But if it comes to the point where you're complimenting someone, even if their work, how do you say, actually sucks, just to curry favor, then it does no one any good. The project itself is in jeopardy because you think you're giving someone the wrong impression that they're doing the right thing. And the only beneficiary there is you, because you're building up this fake reputation or relationship with that person who shouldn't be complimented or sucked up to that degree.
Mm-hmm.
I like what you said there. That kind of brings me to thinking about it is sucking up such a subjective kind of interpretation, right? Like, as Mike says, this is a great title and everything else. Well, if I have a good relationship with Mike, I might look at that and say, yeah, Varun, excellent title. I love it too. It's something there. But if Mike and I were enemies, I might be like, look at Mike just sucking up to win favor. So now Mike authentically, and you can tell, but he authentically likes the title. But if I'm Mike's enemy, that authenticity I don't see that. That lens is completely blurred. So I'm almost wondering what the thoughts of the audience or my colleagues here would be. How subjective is, well, that is sucking up behavior versus that is a pro-social positive influence style behavior. I'd find that interesting for that perspective.
Yeah. I think the more obscure the conversation, the more subject it is to various interpretations. So transparency is a good thing. Having a conversation in public is a good thing. Saying the same thing behind closed doors that you would in open doors, a good thing. It's just about how you manage yourself. That's one angle. Right.
And I think based on the subjectivity, again, agree with Mike that if it's said in a wider group where if there are two people with vested interests against each other and they're judging how the sucking up is happening, that's one thing. But if it's said in a larger group, then at least there are other people who that one person who might feel offended that one person is sucking up to the boss can sort of validate. Normally the conversation go, hey, look at that. Look at Jamie. He's sucking up to the boss. Isn't he such an ass kisser? And if there's a reasonable population within that particular space, then there should be varying interpretations of how I'm sucking up to the boss. And I'm saying, no, that the boss really deserves it, or Jamie's just being a nice person to this, versus Other people saying, oh, you're right, that was way off course. So I think the judgment of that really happens outside that space of those two individuals that are judging each other for sucking up. That's sort of where the validating or reinforcing point happens. And I think that's why it's, again, back to the point of gossip. I think that's the field in which you plow these ideas of who's sucking up to whom, and it sort of disperses it, justifies it, or negates it completely. And that's part of the office dynamic. What does the rest of the people think? Who do they support in this sucking up activity? And does it push the agenda of the person sucking up forward or not?
Right.
So,
for sure.
Jamie, maybe we could have an alternate org chart which is based on suck-uppiness, so we could see like, who's sucking up to who in the chart.
It would be very interesting to do an information process flow and see how it moves versus sucking up and gossip versus the formal channels of communication.
That would be interesting indeed, for sure. Let me. I mean, this is so interesting because these are once again. I mean, this is a topic that nobody discusses, and especially on in a forum like this. Let me ask you, gentlemen, about what a successful. I don't know. I'm trying to find the right words to explain it. Successfully sucking up. What does that look like? Because I've had friends who've said, "Oh no, sucking up it's all about developing trust between two people," and then you've had people say, "Oh no, as long as you do it and they don't figure out that you're doing it, you're fine. That's then you're doing good." But people must be. I mean, you would know, right? Like if somebody's sucking up to you, and so what is what would success be like if that's, if I could even frame it that way?
I'll take a crack at this one and sort of start the conversation. I think that there's I cannot wait to hear everybody's interpretation of this, but I would look at this and say, one of the things, if you're sucking up, it really comes down to me for authenticity. Are you telling me that I did a really good job to win favor with me when I personally know that I just completely blew it, or we missed our quarter goals and you're like, oh, but you still did so good? That's not authentic, right? So a successful suck up strategy, I guess, would be something where there is an element of authenticity. And I really liked how Mike said that you'd say it here in public, but you'd say it in private, but you'd also feel it when you're sitting there and reflecting on your day by yourself, like in that aspect. So there's been points and times where I've had people who I've had conflict with that I intentionally and explicitly took the time to find something that they did that I thought was incredibly well done, and utilize that as a moment to, I guess we would call it sucking up to them, but to go up and say, you know, we don't get along very well, but I thought your report today was absolutely fantastic. And in that aspect, all of a sudden that, you know, sort of action, that behavior started to create a different dynamic in a relationship. But if I would have went there and I was just doing it to try to win favor or something else, like I was able to tell, here's all the reasons why I felt like your report was fantastic. Had that not been authentic, that would have been seen right through. And then it would have only exacerbated whatever conflict was going to end up coming from that. So for me, authenticity is a major, major piece of how that dynamic's taken.
Sure. Yeah. Mike, Jamie?
Well, I'll just amplify the same thing in some different words. Jay, good job on that. And I really, it's so weird, I have to say, I really mean that because of the topic here.
Right.
I think what sucking up has built into its connotation across the planet is one-sided advantage. So I don't like the question, honestly. What is successful sucking up? I think that allows people to think that sucking up can be good, can be okay. It's outside of my value set. So for me, I agree with Jay that it's definitely about just skipping suck up and go right to authentic communication. And the example that you gave of calling out a colleague on something good, catching them doing something right, that's a move toward increasing the aperture between two people so they can communicate better. It's about creating trust. It's about possibly finding a whole new ally in an otherwise difficult situation. So maybe the right question is, how do we not have to suck up? And by the way, as an aside, I want to say that when you get the transcript for this and you post it online, the hashtag for this event is going to be suck. I don't know what you're going to do with that, but that's going to be it.
Well, I feel a little ashamed about the thought process that's been going inside my head, because I'm not as altruistic or as both of you. So when I'm asked to the question, what's a successful suck up? The thing that comes to my mind is a good lie is always something that contains enough truth to be believable. Nice. And I'm still in that space where everyone is personally motivated to move up the ladder, and move up the ladder depends on a person. One of the questions was, is it a survival of the fittest thing? And sometimes it is. And so what is a successful suck up to me is if it serves both parties well, and maybe three parties. One, it serves the person who may not have done that great a job, but could use a little bit of pick me up. And you can specifically point to one area where you think, regardless of how bad most of it was, you find that one area that was good, just so to build that relationship between you and the person who you may need something in the future. Where it gets bad is when it, again, as mentioned by Jay and Mike already, is that when it begins to push the boundary of reasonability. And not only does it affect the person you're sucking up to, but it also affects you in terms of your integrity on how you manage that relationship and how it affects the rest of the team in terms of, can they now trust you to give a reasonable assessment of the performance, so that then it begins to disconnect the entire team from each other. And of course, ultimately, if the person you're sucking up to lets it all go to his head and decides that no matter what he does, there's going to be that sense of approval from you, then the organization as a whole begins to fail. So I think there is some type of successful sucking up, but it's the kind of thing that is looking for something to suck on. Is that even right to say? The right thing to suck on is very important in that conversation. And it should be something that generally should be sucked on, if we have to make a point about that.
You know, that's full circle back to what Jay started with. When I'm imagining some people that I know that have become hooked on or dependent on the approval of others in the workspace, I would have to say that is a successful suck up in the traditional sense of the word, where someone at a much lower level of the organization creates an emotional dependence that advantages them and requires the other person, you know, to continue to get, you know, their drugs, you know, their dopamine or whatever it is from this person. And that creates a dangerous kind of relationship that's outside of the organizational structure. So we're kind of back to that very beginning of, do you live in an environment, do you work in an environment where it's psychologically safe?
Right. And just to extend on what Jamie just said, and also Mike, just to challenge you on you know what you had said earlier about the you know, there's no I guess there's no good way to suck up. I have an example, and I would love for all three of you to pitch in and share your thoughts. So, really good friend of mine. She's from India, and she works in an organization which I mean, the brand, it's a multinational company. You know, a huge organization with offices all over India, all around the world. And just in her office, there are 20,000 employees just in her office. And she hasn't been you know, promoted in 5 years. And then when I had a, you know, conversation saying, you know, why not? And she said all of her colleagues suck up. All of her colleagues suck up, and they keep moving up the ladder. She doesn't feel, I mean, it goes against the values, goes against ethics. She feels disgusted by the whole thought that she needs to suck up just to move up the ladder. But the organization, again, 20,000 employees, how would you even get noticed in such a large organization? I mean, she says her work is good, so let's assume her performance is good. And Mike, I know you're ready to go. So this is over to you, over to the panel. Very curious to hear your thoughts on that.
So my work experience has been a lot less in large organizations like that. So
Right.
this thought is going to probably not be mainstream, and it might not be culturally appropriate or situationally good for a lot of folks, but go to another company.
Yeah.
Right.
Vote with your feet. Vote with your heart. I'm done.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily in disagreement with that at all. You know, it's one of those things where if you find yourself in a culture where you have to placate the ego of somebody above you in order to get ahead, that's probably not a culture that's going to last. Because even if you choose to do that, you say you decide, I'm going to be the best at sucking up, maybe not necessarily at my job, but the best at sucking up. And I suck up to my boss, and my boss, well, guess what? My boss is probably not going to promote me to the level where I'm his or her boss.
Right.
So there's going to be a balance there of how far I'm going to get following the foottails or following the coattails, A. And B, the very fact that that is the determining factor that's getting me to that point rather than necessarily the quality of my work. Well, what happens when that person that I've sucked up to is no longer a part of the organization, or somebody else sucks up just a little bit better than I do and they get the next promotion? Where am I at now in this? Do I create gossip and slam? That's going back to all of those cultural challenges that we're talking about. So I'm not in disagreement. If you find yourself in that type of a situation, it might be time to maybe seek greener pastures elsewhere. The second part is on that. And I think that this is where maybe instead of sucking up, sometimes it's straight up speaking up. And it's advocating for yourself in a more positive and pro-social way and saying, hey, listen, I have executed this. I've done this. I've done this. I've done this. I'd like to know what it takes for me to get to the next level. And then meeting those expectations. If they've set those expectations, they set it out loud. I speak up and say, I'm going to meet those expectations. When I do, my expectation is you move me up. If they don't do it at that point, peace out. Find greener pastures.
And when you do look for those greener pastures, a very specific piece of tactical advice would be when you get your job description and you start talking about that, also take a look at the HR distributed evaluation criteria. Always ask to see what the folks are going to be grading you on. And if you notice that those things aren't in alignment, that can tell you something really valuable.
Interesting.
And as liberal as I am about the concept of sucking up, I have to agree. Just from the situational story that you gave us, it seems that it's an organization that supports sucking up. If she can identify that most of her colleagues are moving forward on the basis of sucking up, it looks like no matter how good that organization's reputation is, that means they are enabling that kind of behavior. And again, what Jay said, your ultimate choice is to leave or take that moment to say, I'm going to speak up. I'm going to say exactly what's on my mind, straight up. And if it doesn't work from there, then you at least gave it a shot, did it the right way. And if it still doesn't work, not the right place for you.
Yeah. Or you could just put really good sucker upper on your resume.
Well, that could work too.
That's right.
All right, gentlemen. So we're down to our last 10 minutes or so, and let's just quickly talk about what would you do if you became the CEO of an organization and sort of politics are rampant, gossiping everywhere, politics everywhere. What would you do to start changing the culture, the organization? Where would you start, and then what would you do? Or can it be done, or should you? Is there any hope? Can you reverse a culture like that? Any thoughts?
That was a lot of questions at one time.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
I've been accused of doing that, so that's like a loaded question. Yeah. So you're CEO day one in an organization, rampant politics, rampant gossip. First steps or strategy. That's what I'm basically looking at. What would you do if you were the CEO?
I don't want to go first. Does anybody else want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first.
Sure, Jay.
On day one, I walk into an organization where I've identified that the culture is gossipy, is politicky, is very awful. The absolute first thing that I'm going to do is listen. And I'm going to take as much time as I can to listen to individuals and have one-to-one. I believe so much as a CEO that you learn more about yourself and the people that are following you in a one-to-one, even if it's a short one-to-one, but having those conversations, having larger conversations. So, I mean, obviously, if you're having 20,000 people in your office, you can't have a forum of 20,000 people to listen to them. But
Sure.
most of the time, you could take division by division, you could take team by team, you could do whatever that is. And sitting down and literally seeing the bad behaviors, whether that's the gossiping, that's the politics, calling them out, saying, okay, I can understand where this might have happened, utilizing a cognitive, tactical empathy approach and saying, I can understand how things have gotten us here. But I don't think any of us are happy with where we're at here. Otherwise, you wouldn't have just brought me in as CEO on day one. So if we want to change, we need to change together. So let's just get it all out on the table. I'm going to listen. I'm going to hear all of this. And then we're going to figure out ways that we're not going to participate in those behaviors. And I really liked, Mike's earlier example of the month, demonstrating and living a vision and mission, but also exhibiting the behaviors that we want to see, the pro-social behaviors, rewarding those pro-social behaviors, really focusing on those pro-social behaviors. We saw somebody like Alan Mulally of Ford Motor Company when he was the CEO and he came in, he changed the entire culture and created the One Ford element, but it was because he was living it, he was breathing it, he was advocating it, and he was rewarding it at the lower levels. So I think listening, understanding, getting a good handle on it, but then also making sure that we're identifying these are the positive behaviors we're making for change. And change takes a while.
Sure. Jamie, Mike?
Sure. I'll take it.
Sure, Jamie.
So I've never worked in a super large organization. The largest organization that I've had under me was about 800 people. So it's not that big as far as companies go. And there have been instances where there has been that element when I walk in. So the first thing that I would do is to sort of try to break all the existing power structures that were there before me, and by immediately creating an open door policy. So whatever power structures existed before, I would have the tendency to disregard it or to at least bypass them for the moment until I get a clearer view of what kind of information gets filtered to whom. So normally I do that on a layer to layer level, whether it's SVP, managerial, and then I try to move down as far down the rank and file as I can, given the extent of my physical surroundings. And then, but aside from that as well, is I try to set the example that there is an expectation of myself that I do not expect of other people, because sometimes these power struggles or these politics are built around the idea that just because someone is a bit higher in the hierarchy, that they have an extraordinary sense of power that doesn't necessarily fit within the job description or the position within the organization. So there's this idea that one person somewhere in the organization has more influence because of his politics, because of his gossiping and all of that. So I try to bring everyone to move up to me so that I can get a better sense of the organization, but I also try to go down to them and give them an example that whatever I'm hired to do, that's all I have to do, that's all I'm expected to do, and not in a bad way, of course, just not just managing the expectations of the company, and anything beyond that will be recognized, and that's the framework that I'm going to be dealing with on a regular basis. And again, just in my experience, just breaking the existing power structures by opening the doors to everyone and setting the expectations across the organization in terms of what is expected of you and what we're being recognized for what you should do, normally breaks the structure of gossip and power play enough so that you can begin to work something in that is more organized and more information driven and more sequential in terms of decision making.
Gotcha.
Cool.
Mike?
So much has been said. I'll add a few ideas that everybody can try on their own if they like. First of all, Anton, I want to thank you for getting me on, because if I had missed this call, I don't know how I wouldn't have known it, but I would have been really disappointed. This is a lot of fun. Thanks for having me. Do you, in each of your parts of the world, do you have a version of a TV show called Undercover Boss?
Yes, we see that.
We are familiar with it. Yeah, on cable TV, we are quite familiar with it. Yeah.
So maybe, and I can't say I would do this, it just sounds good during this chat that we're having, but before walking into the executive suite, I would want to go work on the front lines of the business for a week, you know,
All right.
and see what it's really like. Have those water cooler conversations, hear the gossip, get a feel for things. At scale, there are a couple of different techniques, or there are many actually, but here are two. You can talk to Steve Simpson at Unwritten Ground Rules. He's got an amazing and scalable tool for finding out around here when it comes to, are you guys, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, my screen just disappeared. So around here when it comes to blank, culture, trust, profit, leadership, whatever you want, we blank. So he's got a way of getting that out so you can get a really accurate read on the culture. There's some other listening technologies that will read confidentially emails, internal memoranda, stuff like that, and give you a feeling for how things really work inside. So listening in, like everybody's already suggested, I think is really smart. Specifically, I would look at in an organization that's, you know, very gossipy, I would introduce the idea of design thinking, and that comes in 55 flavors or more. But you can't do everything by yourself as a leader, but you can support different things with money and time and direction. So I'd encourage design thinking to happen so that the more visionary voices could rise above the gossip fray. And I'd probably start an exchange program. And this is something I participated in as a kid living in Brazil and the former Soviet Union. But inside of an organization, I've done it with some of my clients where we take somebody from accounting and plant them in sales, and somebody from manufacturing and put them in operations. And through these week-long or 2-day-long sessions, they get a feel for the different rhythms, the different language, the different kinds of priorities that are shared. Then they go back and they become ambassadors for that other part of the organization. Right. That's one small step to getting people to think a little bit more holistically. And I agree on the open door thing and clarity on context, like everybody has said in their own way. When people know why they're there, not just what they're supposed to do, it can make all the difference in the world in terms of breaking down some of those traditional silos and freshening up some of the conversation practices.
Oh, that's wonderful, Mike. Thank you for putting that quite concisely. It was beautiful. All right, so I think we are almost out of time. And before we wrap up, just the last question, one takeaway message to our audience. What should they walk away with? If there's one thing that they should walk away with during, or rather after today's conversation, what should that one takeaway be? If there's one thing that they need to take away.
I'll start off and
Sure.
give my colleagues a moment here, but I want to say thank you, Anton, for inviting me to be a part of this. I really appreciate that. And thank you, Varun, for being such a wonderful moderator for the show. And to my colleagues here, I have learned from you, and I only hope that I was able to share something that sparked an idea, as many ideas as you have sparked for me. So thank you so much for that. What I would say is, if there's one thing that you can walk away with, if you are working as a leader to build a psychologically safe organization, at that point in time, sucking up is not a necessity. At that point in time, people can actually be free to be themselves. They can be free to share the challenging issues that they may have with policies or ideas that are being presented. They may have the confidence that it's okay for them to say, I've got an idea that maybe should take precedence over this, or they would have the confidence to say, I'm not really buying into this whole concept that you're promoting right now. Can we have a dialogue around there, rather than falsehoods or non-transparent type communications that are only intended to either promote themselves or to get somebody else promoted. So what I would look at is, if you take away one thing, looking at the ways in which you can build a truly authentic, psychologically safe culture, and looking at the behaviors. If you see this sucking up behavior, these office politics behaviors, asking why do those behaviors exist? What is it about the culture that's generating them? And how can I change that culture to something more psychologically safe or more authentic that's going to ultimately lead people finding their purpose, their mission, and their value inside of that organization? So again, thank you, friends. I really, really appreciate all of you.
Nicely put. It's absolutely our pleasure, Jay. All right, Mike, Jamie, your thoughts.
I'll go. I don't want to be the last one out. Mike is way better at closing out thoughts.
I want to be first. That's okay.
So there is no perfect situation where you walk in, especially if you walk in from into the top, and if you're not one of those that manage to work your way through the organization so that you have a great feel of how the organization is structured and the internal pain points. So assuming that you walk in as a CEO, one is I would assume that the first thing to do is to create touch points within the organization that you can trust to filter to you, to give you the right information, or to be able to properly qualify these potentially negative things, whether it's playing politics or sucking up, to be able to give you the right information of what constitutes the good stuff and the bad stuff within the organization. Because it's hard to define the politics and the sucking up just because we don't know the intent. And similar to what Jay said, the second thing is to build a mechanism within the organization that allows the good sucking up, if there's such a thing, or the good playing of politics to make its way through the organization. Right. And as was mentioned, to pick out which ones of those are actually helpful to the organization. Which one of this can we channel properly so that it gets to the right people, gets to the right processes, and then maybe we can build policies on it. So just those two things. Try to understand the organization first and its defects. Find trustworthy people that you can place across the entire organization, and then find the right channels of delivering the positive parts of that message to the right areas of the organization. And if possible, within the disciplinary sanction of the organizations, try to put firm disciplinary sanctions to the negative aspects of this politicking and sucking up.
Good.
Nicely said, Jamie. Mike, we're expecting a cracker of a finish here. No pressure.
Before I get to that, I just want to thank everyone, colleagues and organizers alike. This has been a really amazing conversation. You tried to stoke a little disagreement. I think you got a lot of fervent agreement, but it was still a really strong conversation. And I think the audience got what your title promises. They got a little of this, a little bit of that, and a little bit of the other. So I think you hit it on all those notes. So my closing thought is, so far our conversation's been around organizations and how can you change them? And we came off of this question of if you were a CEO and you walked into your new assignment, what would you do? But I want to step back from that a little bit and realize that everybody that's listening right now is one small cog in a very big machine, because most of the people are working for much larger companies. I'm sure there are some entrepreneurs, but let's focus on the folks who are, that one in an office of 20,000. Sure. So I have this to share. The experience you give others is your brand to them. So let's remember that sucking up, while it feels like it's something that's out of your control, it's filled with gossip, it's got a lot of negative connotation. The way you bring yourself to the office every day, the way you treat others, what you choose to give attention to, how you speak, how you ask, how you engage, that's the experience that you give other people of you. And that's your brand. That's where you have total control over the influence of change. Thanks.
Fantastic, Mike. Thank you so much. Well, with that, I'm afraid we are out of time and we come to a close of today's conversation on office politics and the fine art of sucking up. A big thank you to our guests, Jay, Jamie, Mike. Thank you so much for being with us here today. It has been a pleasure. Do stay back for a few minutes after our live session has ended, just for a short debrief. Well, at the same time, a big shout out goes to the Luminary team and to our audience who tuned in today. Thank you so much for joining us. Another reminder to our viewers, all our past episodes are available on Luminary Learning Solutions YouTube page. So do swing by our page. Don't forget to like our videos and hit that subscribe button. Next week, we'll be talking about disruptive HR practices, and we're trying to find out if it's easier said than done. So don't forget to tune in next week. I'm Varun Chandra Mohan. Thank you for joining us today. See you next Saturday.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.